Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Amanda Vinicky. Paris Schutz is on assignment. On the show tonight.
Pause and think about how unhinged this idea is.
The fight to protect marriage equality and access to contraception is underway. Local members of Congress weigh in.
Would you rather have fewer cops on the street or more cops on the street?
Police Superintendent Brown defends his decision to cancel days off as a fourth officer dies by suicide this year.
The neighborhoods today are suffering because of what the government did 80 years ago.
How old segregation policies connected to vacant lots at the south and west sides matter today. We share findings from a new report.
Chicago's first citywide plan since 1966.
A look at how that 10-year framework plans to address the city's inequities.
We have a stigma in our community about seeking help for mental health.
And a Highland Park council member calls for residents to take advantage of mental health resources in the wake of the mass shooting. But first, some of today's top stories. Governor J.B. Pritzker has COVID. A statement issued this morning by the governor's office says Pritzker was diagnosed as part of his routine testing regimen after being notified of positive tests among several close contacts. Pritzker recently spoke at a Florida Democratic Party convention in Tampa. The statement says he's experiencing mild symptoms and will be working from home. The governor's office says Pritzker is fully vaccinated and double boosted. Federal officials say the city violated the civil rights of Black and Latino Chicagoans by allowing a metal shredding and recycling operation to move from the north side to the southeast side. According to a letter obtained by WTTW News, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development found the Lightfoot administration acted improperly when it gave the parent company of General Iron the green light to operate a metal shredding operation in the 10th Ward. The letter says the decision, quote, continued a broader policy of shifting polluting activities from white neighborhoods to Black and Hispanic neighborhoods, despite the latter already experiencing a disproportionate burden of environmental harms. Mayor Lori Lightfoot's office did not respond to a request for comment. You can read the full letter on our website. Good news for motorists as the average price of gasoline falls below $4.50. That's the nationwide average. According to the latest data from the American Automobile Association, the average price of a gallon of regular gas in Illinois is $4.98. And in Chicago, it's $5.63. Gas prices have been falling for 35 days straight and have dropped about 50 cents a gallon. The Chicago home of Emmett Till is set to receive money to aid its preservation. The 14-year-old Till was abducted and brutally murdered in 1955 while visiting relatives in Mississippi after allegedly whistling at a white woman. His death helped galvanize the civil rights movement. The African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund says the home in the Woodlawn neighborhood will receive a share of $3 million in grants being awarded to 33 sites and organizations preserving important pieces of Black history. Up next, a look at the disturbing number of police suicides. Stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Several city council members are calling for a hearing on the mental health challenges faced by Chicago police officers. This after a fourth officer dies by suicide this year alone. Police Superintendent David Brown, though, has defended canceling days off for officers during the violent summer months and says his officers are, in fact, accessing mental health resources. Here to talk about those challenges and the resources that are available are Robert Sobo, Director of the Employee Assistance Program for the Chicago Police Department, Matt Richards, Deputy Commissioner for Behavioral Health for the City of Chicago, Alexa James, CEO of the National Alliance on Mental Illness Chicago, And Kimberly Marshall, a former Chicago police officer. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Kimberly Marshall, let's start with you, please. You served as a Chicago police officer for 20 years, so you are well aware of the difficulties that Chicago police officers face on the job. Give us a sense of what some of those day-to-day challenges are.
Well, the day-to-day challenges are very well known. We deal with the element that nobody wants to be bothered with. We have to respond to the calls for help. We have to respond to the crimes. We see all of the brokenness of humanity. We see the children hurt. We see the homes destroyed. And we come into contact with a great deal of offenders that have mental illness also. We like to point out when there's a school shooter, oh, this person, has mental illness. Well, the majority of people that shoot at each other and behave in ways that we might not understand, have mental illnesses too. Our country is riddled, and we are in the midst of a mental health crisis of epic proportion. So it's not going to, affect one segment and not the other. Police officers are sworn to protect, put their lives on the line, and we're supposed to be able to separate home and you separate work. And it's not that easy for some of us. Myself, I found it very, very difficult. And I was able to finish my term with the city and move on. And I'm in another field now. I'm in mental health counseling. I work at Drexel Counseling Services. And so I'm trying to help from that side of the badge.
And I definitely want to come back to some of that as well. Now, as we mentioned yesterday, Superintendent Brown, he has defended the use of canceling days off during these summer months, which can be violent, to ensure that he has enough officers on the streets. Here he is.
And the cancel days off, just to add some context to that as well, between Memorial Day and Labor Day, we do cancel 8 of the 104 regular days off that officers have every year. 8 of the 104 regular days off that officers have every year. Besides Memorial Day to Labor Day, in addition to that 8, we rotate one of their days off cancel between 3 and 5 weeks at a time. That adds up to about 12 additional days throughout the year. So 20 regular days off are canceled on average, some officers less, of the 104 days off that officers have in a year.
Okay, so it sounds like Superintendent Brown there saying that over the course of the year, it adds up to about 20 canceled days off out of the 104 days off that they have over the course of the year, 8 over the course of the summer. Alexa, how might less time off, though, impact police officers' mental health?
Well, sleep hygiene is a basic need of proper decision-making, of being able to mitigate stress. Not only sleep, but time with family and connection outside of the job that is, as Kimberly mentioned, is wildly traumatic and high risk and demanding. But I think we're missing the story here about what we're asking for. And I think what we're asking for is a philosophy of wellness and not just programmatic additions. This isn't just about days off. This is about people in the department, from what we hear chronically, experiencing not being heard and seen, feeling tired, feeling worn down. And we can't program our way out of this, right? This really needs to be a philosophy of wellness and not just a program. And it's not just about days off. It's about a collective organizational need that, frankly, most organizations are being demanded to do these days, with so many people carrying such a tremendous burden of stress. First responders are certainly at the front end of all of that.
Robert Sobo, Brown says that officers are, in fact, accessing resources. What are those resources?
Yeah, so in order to help our officers deal with the extraordinary stressors and traumas that they deal with in the world today, we've come up with some of the most comprehensive clinical services available to law enforcement in the nation. We break it down to a number of different services. One is our clinical service, and that is where our department members who are currently sworn, civilian, and or retired can come for any personal or professional issue whatever is bothering them so that they can come and process them in order to regain a sense of well-being and avoid a mental health breakdown or crisis. We have 6 sworn police officers who are part of our drug and alcohol service, and those officers are state certified for being drug and alcohol counselors. They provide meetings, assessment, and treatment and referrals to all department members as well as their families when a addiction or substance use issue, comes about. They are available and they do work 24/7, as do our clinicians as well. We have a very robust peer support program that is approximately 200 police officers of every rank and file. And these officers volunteer their own time. They come from all different ethnicities, religions, and experiences, and they give of themselves and their expertise to officers and family members who are in need also at any given time.
So you're saying that there's quite a bit that officers can access. Matthew, how much of it is about stigma and officers actually reaching out to receive those services?
Well, I think, Brandis, as Alexis said, it's important for us to take a holistic view of how officer wellness is really connected to the overall wellness of the city. We've increased our mental health budget as a city by 7-fold since 2019. We're expected to deliver services to 60,000 residents this year as compared to 3,500 in 2019. And officers have some specific risk factors for suicide risk that add on top of general risk factors that we saw increase during the pandemic. There was a 10 to 15% increase in suicide among the general population since the pandemic, and that was really driven by increases in suicide among older adults and increases in suicide among younger, particularly Black males. And we've really seen it driven by an increase in firearm-related suicide. It continues to be very male-dominated. 80% of suicides occur among males. And so I think it's really important that we take that holistic view to say, how is the wellness of our officers connected to the wellness of our communities? And so the investments that we're making in our communities, making it easier through dialing a 3-digit number like 988, or come this fall, we're going to have a 211 system. And if you dial that 3-digit number, you can get connected to all those mental health services that the city has funded. So I think it's important that we understand that when we support the wellness of all of our communities, we also support the wellness of the officers who serve them.
Kimberly, as an officer and now working on the other side and the wellness side, what kind of supports do you think officers need?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part.
What kind of supports do you think officers need?
All of the support that Dr. Sobo and Mr. Richards mentioned are great. I think that when you mention stigma, some officers will be very reluctant to put themselves in that category because they might be frightened that there'll be some reprisal. And of course, the city does have to protect themselves. But I was lucky to have Dr. Sobo as a counselor when I was a police officer. So to show that he's still there and he has put in all these wonderful new innovations since 2019, that brings a lot of hope for me, for fellow officers. That's very encouraging to hear. I was not aware of that.
And we're almost out of time. Alexa James, I want to get you in here one last time. We've got about 30 seconds. You are the police department's former wellness advisor, but you left the post. Did you feel like you weren't being heard?
I think it's really difficult to be an outside consultant in a bureaucracy. I certainly was heard by my colleagues. I had an incredible experience working with Dr. Sobo and his team. I listened more probably than I spoke. And I think that I felt a bit frustrated that that philosophy that I mentioned needed a tremendous amount of investment. And I'm not sure if the time was right for my feedback consistently.
I'm sure some folks hope that the timing will be right soon, but that is where we'll have to leave it for right now. Robert Sobo, Matt Richards, Lexa James, and Kimberly Marshall, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Be well, everyone.
A new study draws a straight line between legal segregation that began in the 1940s and the tens of thousands of vacant properties found on the south and west sides today. And researchers say this hasn't only helped keep Chicagoans mired in poverty for generations, but also fueled the drop in the city's black population. WTTW News reporter Heather Sharon joins us now with a look at what this study found. And Heather, the study comes from the Cook County Treasurer's Office. Tell us what it found.
Well, it found that essentially the map used in the 1940s to dissuade banks from making mortgage loans in primarily Black communities in Chicago is essentially the same map as the tens of thousands of so-called distressed properties in Chicago. Those are properties that are at least 3 years behind on their property taxes and are often abandoned or vacant. And it found that this has taken a real toll specifically on Chicago's Black population center on the south and the west side, which is just, of course, facing a number of different challenges.
So you also spoke with Cook County Treasurer Maria Pappas about her reaction to this study's conclusion. Here she is.
It was like an aha or an oh my God moment where we said, these two are correlated.
Heather, what prompted her office to even conduct this study?
Well, her office has known for several years that the tools that Cook County has to address these properties and attempt to find new owners for them and to clear that property tax debt is not working. So what she did is that she had her office go back to the beginning and try to figure out how this problem started in the hopes that getting to the root of the matter would come up with ways to fix the problem.
Now, the study's primary author, Hal Dardick, the Director of Research Affairs for the Treasurer's Office and a former reporter, said the impact of that nearly intractable system had a profound impact on Chicago. Here he is.
The systemic housing discrimination continues to rob communities of wealth. We need to really turn that around.
So, Heather, what does that look like to the average Chicagoan?
Well, it means that you have neighborhoods where there are more vacant or abandoned properties than you have occupied homes and businesses. And particularly the neighborhoods of Englewood and North Lawndale have been significantly impacted in this. And on one block alone in North Lawndale, there are 13 vacant or abandoned properties, more than double the number there were back in the 1940s.
The study also looked at the scavenger sale and whether or not it is effective, and that is, the most powerful tool to breathe new life into these properties. Is it working?
It is not. It's essentially an exceedingly complicated system that involves an auction every 2 years, and that then you can go to court if you win that auction to petition to take control of the property. But it just is not effective to get these literally tens of thousands of properties back into somebody's hands who can fix them up or build something new. And that has created properties that have been magnets for crime and eyesores for decades. And that, of course, has hurt families' ability to use those properties to build wealth and has increased crime and fueled the exodus of Black Chicagoans from the city.
Okay. Heather Sharon, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Brandis.
And of course, to read Heather's full story, you can head to our website where you'll find a link to the full study and its recommendations. That's all at WTTW.com/news. And now to Amanda with local members of Congress. Amanda.
Brandis, just hours ago, House lawmakers passed the Respect for Marriage Act. The legislation protects same-sex and interracial marriages nationwide. It's a reaction to the Supreme Court's recent ruling that overturned federal abortion rights, but the bill's fate in the Senate looks grim. Here's Senate Leader Chuck Schumer.
A few days ago, the junior senator from Texas said that the Supreme Court's decision protecting marriage equality was clearly wrong and argued that partisan state legislatures to determine who can and cannot get married. Other MAGA Republicans have echoed the same thing. We need to pause and think about how unhinged this idea is.
Here to talk about that and much more of what's happening on Capitol Hill this week are Congressman Mike Quigley, a Democrat from Chicago's North Side, Congresswoman Marie Newman, a Democrat from Chicago's Southwest Side, and Congressman Danny Davis. He's a Democrat from the Austin neighborhood of the city. We invited all of the Republican members of the Illinois Congressional Caucus, but none accepted our invitation. We do thank each of you for being here, and let's begin with you, please, Congressman Quigley. Now, the Respect for Marriage Act, again, protecting same-sex and interracial marriages that are legal in one state have to be recognized by all other states. It did get support from 47 Republican members of the U.S. House. Do you expect that it is going to get likewise GOP support in your chamber across the Capitol?
You know, it's discouraging after this hearing Mr. Schumer say what he said, but proportionally, there are that many Republican senators willing to do the right thing. We need 10. There'd be hope. But look, we took the Republicans at their word. We're looking at the concurring opinion of Justice Thomas. Clearly, they're going after marriage equality. And, you know, we have to act, not just in the House and the Senate, with President Biden's signature. There's a real danger that a lot of civil liberties are at risk.
You do believe that this is a true danger, Congressman?
Oh, absolutely. I think they smell blood in the water. They've seen what's happened already, and I think they're on the move. Again, reading Judge Thomas's concurring in opinion, you know, he's going after sodomy laws, he's going after marriage equality, and I think that's just where they begin.
Now, Congresswoman Newman, the House plans to soon vote on a bill that would protect access to contraception as well as giving protection to providers who prescribe birth control. This is another one. I assume you do believe that that will pass in the House, but where there are tighter margins in the Senate, is this going to be in trouble?
Yeah, you know, for sure it will pass in the House. We definitely have the votes there. In the Senate, we're hearing, you know, some good rumors that potentially there's more folks that are interested in protecting birth control than we have originally anticipated. So we'll see. What I do know is that those states, all states, want birth control, abortion care, all of the, you know, fertility rights, everything around women's health care and health care to be protected. So if in fact those GOP senators choose to vote against that, they are going in direct defiance against the wishes of the voters in their state. That's just very clear.
Congresswoman, if you do get Republican support for measures such as that, does that undermine Democrats' position at all? It is, of course, an election year, that your party is the one that protects personal rights and freedoms.
Right. Well, I think it is very clear which party protects personal freedoms. I don't think we have any dangers there. And if we can get them, I think it speaks well of our negotiation skills and our ability to work together as a Congress if, in fact, some of these GOP senators come across. So I don't think there's, by the way, that's not why we do things. We do things because our constituents want them to be done. And we vote the way, most of us vote the way our constituents. Now, some of these GOP senators do not vote with their constituents. So we're doing it because it's the right thing for America. Whether it is favorable electorally or politically, it is kind of off to the side. But I do think that Americans very much will see that, you know, that Democrats are the ones that protect their personal freedoms and will work hard and have worked hard in the past, that the proof is in the pudding.
Adding here that the U.S. House did recently pass legislation that would protect the right to an abortion, but that is one that appears stunted in the opposite chamber. Moving on to gun control legislation, with tomorrow a Senate Judiciary hearing, and the mayor of Highland Park, Nancy Rotering, as well as Illinois Senator Tammy Duckworth are expected to testify. This is on an assault weapons ban, but Congressman Davis, what else is happening with gun control? I'm particularly interested in legislation that would go about an active shooter drill and notifications of active shooter situations.
Well, I often make the point, or attempt to make the point, that freedom is a hard-won thing, and that each generation have to win it and win it again. The idea that assault weapons should be available and in the hands of civilians, I think is preposterous. I think it's time that we do it once and for all, that assault weapons are banned. Nobody should have access to them, except in some instances, law enforcement people and military personnel. I think making guns more difficult to acquire and outlawing those that we know are simply weapons of war. Civilians should not have them. They should not be available. And so I think those two practices would really go a long way.
Well, Congressman Quigley, in order for that to happen, this is one where getting that across the finish line could take changing the rules on a filibuster. We've talked a lot about a filibuster for various issues. Is the matter of guns going to be the issue that changes that in Washington?
Look, I think there's a lot of reasons we should go after the filibuster law. Number one's voting rights, because all of the rights fall from there. So I think it's time to get rid of this filibuster, which was based on racism a long time ago. If you're going to have meaningful change on climate change, on gun control, on women's access to contraceptions and basic equality, you're going to have to go after that. What single measure will finally get members to go after the filibuster? You know, right now, I just don't see the will to do it among two senators, Democratic senators in particular.
Speaking of that, is referencing, of course, one of those senators would be Joe Manchin. He recently, after a year of negotiations, shut down a tax and climate measure. Here is what he said about criticism leveled by his fellow Democrats for taking a year to make that decision.
If they don't understand inflation is the number one critical factor that we have that's hurting every family and harming our economy right now, it's inflation. And I'm very much concerned. I have never changed my position. I'm not stringing anybody along.
Congresswoman Newman, we are expecting to hear something from President Biden on the matter of climate tomorrow. What are you hoping he is going to do to act on this, as we've got scorching weather across the United States, Europe, et cetera?
Right. I'm hoping that he is going to take executive action. You know, that's what we're hopeful for, and would be a long time in coming, correct? And let's be clear about Senator Manchin. I just want to comment on his comment to say that we are all highly cognizant. Inflation is coming down, by the way. You know, we're seeing gas prices come down. We've made measures here in the Congress to bring prices down over the last 2 months, and we're actually seeing them come down now at the grocery store as well. So inflation is important, and everybody's everyday prices are important to us. But one of the greatest measures by which we could bring down inflation is to enact clean energy laws and renewable laws and bring green climate action into the fore, which is why we're so hopeful for the president to create executive action. We've been asking for months now. So to be clear, Senator Manchin is speaking out of every side of his mouth, is that we're all in agreement that inflation is critically important. But one of the top ways to alleviate it is by creating climate action in a transformative way. But I'll take it medal for now.
And that is where we'll have to leave it for now, at least. But we will be joined again by the members of Congress to discuss the January 6th hearings and more. So at this time, our appreciation to Representatives Quigley, Newman, and Davis. There's more Chicago Tonight just ahead, so stick around.
Much of the story of Latinos in America is that of entrepreneurship. About 5 million Latino-owned businesses currently exist in the U.S.
Predominantly Latino communities often bear the environmental burden of heavy industry. Residents of those communities say they have a hard time making their concerns heard.
A Chicago-based photographer has a personal understanding of immigration, and he has spent years documenting small businesses.
The forces of gentrification can make people being priced out of their neighborhoods feel powerless. But the founders of Lolita's Bodega say residents have more power than they think.
And still to come on Chicago Tonight, members of Congress react to evidence that the Secret Service deleted texts from January 6th that could have helped the investigation into former President Trump. How the city's new 10-year plan, dubbed We Will Chicago, aims to address inequities in transportation, health, and more. And a Highland Park council member calls for residents to take advantage of mental health resources as the community heals from the mass shooting. But first, some more of today's top stories. NASCAR gets the green flag and is coming to Chicago. At a news conference announcing what will be the first of its kind NASCAR race in the city, Mayor Lori Lightfoot said bringing the series here was too good an opportunity to miss.
And the opportunity to bring something so unique as NASCAR to the city of Chicago, and I think it's going to be one of the most iconic race courses maybe ever. And introduce a whole new fan base to what NASCAR is about in the city of Chicago. We couldn't pass up that opportunity.
The first race is set to take place in July of next year. That race is part of a 3-year deal. And lions are back on the prowl. After a month-long spa vacation, must be nice, the Art Institute of Chicago's famed lions returned to their posts today and are once again guarding the museum's Michigan Avenue entrance. The bronze felines had been getting a routine cleaning and fresh coating of wax since mid-June. According to an Art Institute statement, they are now, quote, cleaner and greener than ever. And now, Amanda, we toss it back to you.
Thanks, Brandis. Earlier in the program, we discussed assault weapons. Now we're joined again by 3 members of Illinois' congressional delegation, Representatives Quigley, Newman, and Davis. Again, we invited all the Republican members of Illinois' congressional delegation, but none accepted our invitation. I want to preview the January 6th hearings coming up Thursday. Representative Kinzinger said that this is going to show President Trump's inaction on January 6th and open people's eyes in a big way. So, Congressman Quigley, has the committee here proven beyond a reasonable doubt that criminal conduct was done, that there's a criminal case, that is, against the former president?
Look, beyond a reasonable doubt, my old criminal defense attorney tells me a lot. But I think it messaged the American people that the president led a coup, an attempt to overturn a lawful election. He violated several laws in so doing. At some point in time, this parallel investigation by the Justice Department will bear out whether or not we can prove the second point you raised, and that is beyond a reasonable doubt. But, you know, in the end, I was part of 2 investigations of the president, the impeachment investigations. I never felt that the jury was the Senate. I thought it was the American people. And I thought that the January 6th panel has done an amazing job, at least getting to middle America and letting them know what kind of president we served under for 4 years.
And briefly, Congressman, do you think that the American people have learned anything? Is the Republic awakened in any sort of different way?
Again, I think if you, there are probably 3 groups here. The groups that will never leave Trump, the group that would never going to be with Trump. But the critical group in the middle, President Wilson said, what, 5 to 10% of the American people decide all the elections. That's the audience. And I think the January 6th committee has done a great job messaging to them and moving them, and it will impact elections.
Congressman Davis, what are your thoughts on how the Department of Justice has been doing what it has been doing? Is the DOJ acting quickly enough, as President Trump is very much saying that he plans to perhaps shortly announce a run for 2024 White House bid?
Well, I think the January 6th committee has set the stage for the Justice Department. And as a result of the work of the committee, I think the Justice Department is now ready to move more aggressively than it has moved earlier. I agree that most Americans believe that there has been culpability on the part of the president, and I don't think those individuals would be prepared to vote this individual back into office, no matter what he might be running for. There are a lot of individuals who are hanging on to him, but not enough. And so I think his days as an elected person are over. The committee is about to end its investigation. We'll know what their findings are. And I think the Justice Department is right on the heels.
And Congresswoman Newman, we will be evidently having that hearings completed without texts from the Secret Service from January 5th and 6th. Do you think that there's some sort of intent to have hidden and rid of those texts that could be used as evidence? And should there be any consequences for potential violation of records documentation to the National Archive?
Yeah, well, what I do know is this committee is well equipped and is actively looking into what happened there. Now, the administration is indicating that that somehow these texts during some software update were somehow magically erased. We don't know at this point, but I do know, and I have a lot of faith in this committee, that they will get to the bottom of that. And if there is anything, any wrongdoing there, I would hope there would be some level of repercussion from that.
Going to move to somewhat of a lightning round on various issues that face members of Congress, such as yourselves. So Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, as well as others, have said that they are in favor of expanding, adding 4 justices to the U.S. Supreme Court. I would like each of you just a yes or no answer. Congressman Quigley, do you support that?
No.
Congressman Davis?
Yes.
And Congresswoman Newman?
Yes.
And how about the notion of congressional offices, including that of Representative Chuy Garcia from Chicago, planning to have their staffs unionized? Do you support that, Congressman Davis?
Yes.
Newman?
Yes.
And Quigley?
Absolutely yes.
And then also Governor J.B. Pritzker really getting a lot of attention, looking like Trump, not the only one perhaps running for 2024 bid. It is certainly possible that Joe Biden could face a primary in 2024. If that were to be the case, would you support Pritzker? Congressman Davis?
I don't know what the situation may be at the time. And I don't know whether or not the president is going to run for re-election.
Congresswoman Newman?
Well, I think there's a lot of speculation out there, so I'm not going to even address speculation.
And Congressman Quigley?
The incumbent Democratic president gets first choice at what he does. If he decides not to run, I would certainly encourage Governor Pritzker to give it a shot.
Congressman Quigley, let's stick with you. We have talked about abortion, gun legislation, inflation. Heading into the midterms, what are you focused on? What are your concerns?
I think inflation is a major concern. I believe Marie's right. It's on the right track now, but it's a worldwide issue, particularly relating to energy. And these are extraordinarily difficult issues to address. But it's something I think that we need to focus on at the House level and in our home districts.
And we have only about 30 seconds left, so very briefly here, Congressman Davis, there are reports that, in fact, we will not get an executive order on climate change from President Biden. What then should Congress do in the face of that?
I think Congress could keep working to make sure that we have the best protections for the environment that we can create.
Well, thank you very much for that answer. All things that we will be following and you will perhaps be voting on. So our thanks to Representatives Quigley, Newman, and Davis.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now, Brandes, we toss it back to you.
Amanda, thank you. Chicago is releasing its first citywide plan in more than 50 years. The draft plan, called We Will Chicago, will lay out a 10-year vision for how the city can address systemic inequities by first acknowledging the policies that created them, then creating goals for the city's future. These goals, created with over 2 years of community input, look at how transportation, environmental policy, and public safety, among other issues, can be transformed. Joining us now with more are Melvin Thompson, Executive Director of the Endaleo Institute and Co-Chair of Transportation and Infrastructure for the plan, Ayanna Simba, City Programs Director with the Illinois Environmental Council and Co-Chair of Environment, Climate, and Energy for the plan, and Skylar Larimore, Incoming Director of Policy for the City of Chicago. Thanks to the three of you for joining us. Skylar, let's start with you, please. How is this plan different from other city plans that we've seen over the years?
Yeah, so thank you for having us tonight. This is the first citywide plan proposed since 1966. And I will say it's the first one that has been as participatory as we can imagine. So from the very beginning, we brought together community stakeholders, residents, community-based organizations to say, what should our citywide planning process look like? We then did an all-call, a citywide application process in 2021 to ask who wants to draft the plan alongside city staff and sister agency staff. And then leaders such as Ayanna and Melvin on the call raised their hand to join us on this adventure. So for the last 12 months, we've been working side by side for many months over many a Zoom meeting to draft really high-level goals and objectives for the future of Chicago to be more equitable and more resilient. So think of this as a people-centered, data-driven plan that will empower residents to reflect on our shared past and truly reimagine our city's future. And think of it as a roadmap for how the city, people, businesses, and communities can thrive, stretching housing and neighborhoods to public health and safety and more.
And Skylar, you mentioned, acknowledging the past. Something else that's really interesting about this plan is that is the past that it acknowledges. Tell us briefly about that. And then, of course, I want to get Melvin and Ayanna in on this, too.
Yeah, so this truly is the first plan of its kind around the country to look back as we are looking forward, to acknowledge the impact of racist, discriminatory, and predatory policies of previous plans, policies, and private sector practices that continue to exacerbate racial and social inequality today. So we centered that information right in the foreword of the plan. We have details about highway construction to redlining, from school closure to industrial pollution. And it's a heavy way to start the plan, but it grounds us in a recognition of why we see such extreme racial and ethnic wealth gaps and health gaps throughout our city and what we need to do in order to change those realities for our communities and for our residents.
And of course, you mentioned many a Zoom meeting over the last couple of years with all of this community input. Ayanna, dozens of people working on your pillar of environment alone. What's it been like to have this much input and collaboration in the planning process?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's been a huge opportunity. Of course, having a ton of Zoom calls is always interesting, but I think having a plan that's this accessible and being able to have the time to not only think about, like, I think Skylar kind of hinted to this, right? Like, where we started even talking about the different goals and objectives, like what language are we using, because that is important. So really being able to have access to this process and being able to, as a co-chair, partially lead was something that was really significant, and I felt really led to the overall pillar that we put together that I think does have real impact on environmental equity, justice, and overall resiliency.
Melvin, your group works in Washington Heights. What's been the reaction to folks to the possibility of these goals coming to fruition down the line?
Well, there's excitement. There was a healthy dose of cynicism at the beginning, but Washington Heights has really experienced a whirlwind of attention over the last year. Secretary Buttigieg visited our 95th Street station last summer. We've secured a very large grant. And then for me to kind of represent the community for transportation and infrastructure, with all the talk around the country about investing in infrastructure, I mean, it was really a natural progression for us.
Ayanna, talk a little bit about some of the environmental burdens on Black and Latino communities due to, the inequitable development that the report highlights, and how the plan prioritizes addressing those burdens.
Yeah, so I mean, when we're talking about the community as a burden, really what we're talking about is, of course, as I think you mentioned, Black, brown, and low-income communities that historically, due to historical redlining and inequitable land use and planning processes, have essentially become the dumping grounds for industry. And even in those cases where industry has left, they have been left with all of this legacy pollution. And of course, being coupled with not having resources to remediate some of these issues. So part of the plan that we worked on was, one, formally recognizing this disinvestment in equitable policy. How does this actually translate to health impacts? But I think at the same time, while also recognizing, what has been done and what has been wrong, also recognizing targets for positive outcomes. So one of the things that we really harped in on was an environmental impact assessment that can be used during the development process. So thinking about if there is an incoming development, what impact is that going to have not only on the air and the water, but what is that going to have on communities? Looking at it from an environmental justice and a climate resiliency perspective. Part of that also being that making sure that community members are actually able to engage in the planning process, making sure that they're on the same equal ground as developers. It's not someone having access to information and the communities having to play catch up. And then finally, kind of in a similar vein, wanting to make sure that communities actually have the tools and resources to address the climate crisis. As I talked about for, resources, it's not just the same for a reason. When communities that already are dealing with legacy pollution don't have the money for projects, or they don't have the technical assistance to access grant proposals or projects, that ends up meaning that they are not prepared not only for what we're experiencing now, but the future climate impact. So those are really the things that we harped on as part of the environmental pillar.
And Melvin, same question to you, but with regards to transportation in Washington Heights, what are some of the major needs there, and how might this plan address it?
Well, we were fortunate to have a renovated train station at 95th Street back in 2018, a record investment by the CTA of $300 million. But we suffered the misfortune of not having anything built around it. So they left this gap that left us disconnected between the 95th Street corridor and this spaceship of a new station that landed in our community. And so, what we're excited about now is the whole planning process around the amenities that can feed into this nexus of a station that we all love. $198 million escapes our community because people leave the community to go elsewhere for what they need. And so we've got this huge opportunity with the station at the center that we can right some really, decades-long wrongs.
A lot of work to do. Skylar, we only have 10 seconds really, but this is not specific policies in this plan. Of course, those policies come in down the road, correct?
Yeah, so actually our pillar teams generated a list of 600 policy ideas that they thought would advance the goals and objectives in the plan. You can see them on the wewillchicago.com website, but we are going to be focusing the next 4 months of public engagement on the goals and objectives at a high level to make sure that we are moving in the direction Chicago's want us to move in, that this is our vision for the future, our shared vision for the Chicago we want to become, and excited to have conversations through November 1st to make sure that we're including diverse voices in this planning process and making sure that we are ready to implement it come 2023 and beyond.
All right. Sounds like there's more to come. We look forward to all of it. Thanks so much for joining us, Melvin Thompson, Skylar Larimore, and Ayanna Simba.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, the push for mental health resources in the wake of the Highland Park mass shooting. That's a conversation that first aired on Chicago Tonight Latino Voices with Univision's Alex Hernandez. But first, a look at the weather.
In what is now a devastatingly familiar pattern in America, the town of Highland Park has begun its slow recovery from the shock of a mass shooting. The 4th of July parade shooting took 7 lives and injured dozens more, and the trauma of the tragic event has impacted residents there, as well as those in the surrounding communities. Joining us now with more are Highland Park Mayor Nancy Rodering and Highland Park City Council member Andres Tapia, who wrote about his experience at the parade in a social media post. I want to welcome both of you to Chicago Tonight Latino Voices. Thank you for being here. And I want to start with you, Council Member Tapia. Can you tell us about what you experienced that day?
Yeah, it was a joyful day, blue skies, festivity, families everywhere. And the mayor and the city council were carrying proudly the banners of Highland Park. We were like 2.5 blocks away from Port Clinton Square when all pandemonium broke loose. And I heard somebody say shooter in Port Clinton Square. And my wife was sitting, waiting for me at back of the dais where I was going to return after we had finished marching. So I ran with everything I had in counter to the tsunami of people running down the hill on Central Avenue. And I remember, I'll never forget coming upon Port Clinton Square and seeing the bodies there and looking and trying to see if one of them was my wife. And suddenly, in the panic and the fear, I looked up and there she was standing all alone in a distinctive blue T-shirt, ironically enough, the March for Our Lives T-shirt that we had gone on in an anti-gun protest just not too long before that. And there she was, and untouched, at least physically, and we had sort of embrace of our lives. And so that was moments that I will never forget, and I think will stay with me for a very long time.
I can't even imagine what that might have felt like. Mayor, tell us about where you were at that moment, and what were your thoughts right after?
My thoughts were one of disbelief. My thoughts were also, what do I do right now to keep my community safe? We immediately pivoted to an emergency evacuation of the parade route and proceeded to just run to both sides of the parade route and yell to people to run, that there was an active shooter, to leave their belongings, leave their chairs, just run. It was just, we were halfway through the parade. So we had a whole slew of folks who didn't know what was happening. It was very strange because at one point I remember turning around, I think I spoke directly to Andres, and I said, that's so weird that the band has stopped playing. All I hear is a drum cadence, but it wasn't the drum cadence. It took me 4 days to realize that was the sound of the gunfire.
And I think everybody is very familiar with the band, seeing that particular video of the kid shooting that video on social media, and where we see the band starting to run. Exactly. So that's around the area where you guys were at. Mayor, people might not think of Highland Park as a community with a significant Latino presence. What are the demographics like there?
About 25% of our school children are Latino, and Highwood and Highland Park really view each other more than sister communities, but as one community. Having known several of these families for decades, through my own children, through coaching soccer, we are all one community. And to that end, I feel it's very important that people recognize that the Latino community has been impacted just as hard as the rest of the non-Latino community. We know that folks in Waukegan and North Chicago and Highwood are needing services just as much as people who live in Highland Park.
Definitely. Councilmember Tapia, what was behind your decision to post publicly about your experience and speaking out about mental health?
Yeah, there are a couple of reasons. One is the city immediately offered mental health trauma help like the very next morning, and then it just has been going on since then. And they offered it to city staff and city elected officials so that we could go in and really get the help we needed personally. So that was one step that I took for my own health and my health of my family. But also I needed to be strong, along with the mayor and the rest of the city leaders, to comfort and support our citizenry. And I realized as I was there that I needed to be a role model about getting the help, because I really needed it. I was as devastated as everybody else, as traumatized as everybody else. And I saw the methodology be so healthy and so good. And I saw 25 of us coming in very brittle and very broken and very scared, and coming out of a 2-hour session in a much more, consolidated, integrated way, and able to have enough strength to do the hard work ahead of us. So I felt that not only did it benefit me, I had to tell others that it was beneficial.
And so much more to be done. Mayor, you and other members of Highland Park community have been in Washington, D.C. recently, asking for legislative changes to prevent future shootings. What would you like to see done?
Frankly, Alex, I think we need a national ban on weapons that were built and designed for mass destruction in combat. We as a city banned assault weapons in 2013 in the wake of Sandy Hook, recognizing that this devastation was all over our country. But Highland Park isn't an island. And so we reflected the values of our community But I would guess that the values of most Americans is that we do need to get these weapons off of our streets. For most of the mayors in this country, it's not a question of if this happens, but when will this happen? And that's a horrible thing to think about. We talked earlier about the evacuation of the parade route. What's also very telling is that the children immediately knew what to do. The adults and the grandparents were looking at each other like, what are you saying to me? What do you mean active shooter? The kids said, run. They knew immediately. And I think that's a very telling and sad implication of our nation.
What advice do you have for people who are reluctant maybe to seek out mental health help?
Yeah, and this is true for everybody, but I'll speak particularly to Latino community. You know, we have a stigma in our community about seeking help for mental health. And we have to really embrace the need, and that mental health is as important as physical health. And the resources are there. And this was traumatic. No one escapes the impact of what happened, whether you got physically injured or not. And I've been going to our kitchens and restaurants here in Highland Park and asking to talk with the Latino staff there in Spanish and saying, hey, as Latino men, many times we say, soy valiente, I'm brave, I don't need that. And to say that, you know, the valiente thing to do is to seek help. And we cannot help our families unless we take care of ourselves. So that's the message. It's not a stigma. There's nothing to be ashamed of. The help is there, and we're providing that. And please seek it out.
Our thanks to Mayor Nancy Rotering and Council Member Andres Tapia. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Alex.
Back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Tuesday night. Don't forget, you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website.
You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Amanda Vinicki.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.